Well, one of the things that if you've been around Harvester any length of time, you know that we keep it pretty real around here. We can't do otherwise. We are not the greatest, we're not the greatest act in town. In fact, we're, sometimes tripping over ourselves sometimes just to do what we do. And apparently at least some of you are comfortable with that. And so we're actually going to end into a little series of messages and worship themes over the next few weeks. It's all Keep It Real. Today we're going to talk about keep it real in parenting. Over the next few weeks we're going to be talking about some things like how to keep it real in our marriages, how to keep it real at work, how to keep it real in church, how to keep it real with God, just everyday things that somehow can get in the way of that stuff. And does God have anything to, help us keep it real? And so that's just a taste of some of the things that are going to be coming up in the days and the weeks ahead. But today we're going to talk about that in the context of parenting, keeping it real in parenting. The whole parenting thing, I can't think of a more intimidating task on the face of the planet than being a parent today. And but you know what? I think every parent that's ever lived at any point in time would say the same thing. The idea of bringing a life into the world and then realizing I'm responsible for this person, becoming responsible, and all the things that go with that, and all the trials, and a child has yet to be born with a little tag on their ear with the instruction set. So in addition to it being the most daunting task on the face of the earth, it is also one that we don't get a lot of training in advance upon. And so we hope that today you get a few ideas to take with you to keep it real when it comes to the whole parenting thing. We do know that it's very, very important, and very, very important to God. It's very important to God's church to address things like this and talk about these topics in a way that is helpful and encouraging and biblical. Listen to these words from the 78th Psalm. O my people, listen to my instructions. Open your ears to what I am saying, for I will speak to you in a parable. I will teach you hidden lessons from the past, stories we have heard and known, stories our ancestors handed down to us. We will not hide these truths from our children. We will tell the next generation about the glorious deeds of the Lord, about His power and His mighty wonders. For He issued His laws to Jacob. He gave instructions to Israel. He commanded our ancestors to teach them to our children, so that the next generation might know them, even children not yet born. And they, in turn, would teach their own children. So each generation should set its hope anew on God, not forgetting His glorious miracles and obeying His commands. Obviously, this whole issue of passing along life, passing along faith, passing along the truth of God, the stories of God, a faith in God, is something that's very, very important from a biblical standpoint. And I know that you all wouldn't be sitting here this morning if these things weren't important to you as well. It's not that they're not important, it's just that, they seem so beyond us at times to get a handle on. And I'm going to tell you right at the start, I've already told you, and you've already figured out, I'm not a perfect pastor. I'm not a perfect parent either, by any stretch of the imagination. Hopefully I've learned a few things. I'm a parent and a grandparent now, and I realize sitting in the room this morning, we have a collection of people. Some of you are parents, currently in the throes of, being a parent. Some of you are grandparents, and you thought the job was done, and then all of a sudden you realize it's not done. You know why? Because sometimes they come back, We've been through that one too. And also, you realize, you have a passion and a burden for those grandkids, and now it's more complicated because, I'm a grandparent, but I'm not a parent, and it gets kind of crazy to sort out. So I get all that. And I realize that for some of you here tonight, you're neither, but you're a part of a congregation, you're a part of the church who takes the verses that I just read seriously and are very concerned that the truths about God, that the faith of God, that a vibrant faith in God gets passed along to the next generation through what God accomplishes through the life and ministry of Harvester United Methodist Church. At the end of it all, though, one of the things I'm aware of, it's very easy to throw out a lot of platitudes and pious stereotypes about any of these subjects we're going to be talking about, be it parenting, be it marriage, be it our jobs, be it whatever the case may be. And so what we really want to do over the next few weeks is talk about what it looks like and feels like in real life. It's obviously an important priority. How do we go about applying it? So this morning, I just would like to share with you from my heart some of the things I've learned about keeping it real when it comes to this whole issue of parenting. Not keeping it perfect. My kids will tell you, if you ask them, that Dad made his share of mistakes and still makes them even as a grandparent, but hopefully some things that we've learned along the way. Here's one thing that the scriptures that I just read reflect, and that is this. Kids need a description, not just instruction. What do I mean by that? They need to hear stories. They need to hear stories. Now, my experience is we never outlive our desire or thirst for a really good story. I think that's true of adults, but especially with children. They need God's truth revealed to them in story form. And in the Bible, I believe that's one reason that 70% of the Bible is story. 70% of the Bible is story. And in some cases, there are stories about those who were giants in the faith and accomplished great things for God. There are also stories about those who, well, maybe not so much, because that's part of keeping it real. You see, the Bible is a very real book, and the stories of the Bible are very real stories. There are stories of success. There are stories of failure. There are stories of great faith. There are stories of great lack of faith. It's all in there. And when we pass along these stories, children have an opportunity to connect with it because it's real. And so in our church program, so to speak, for children, we concentrate, for one thing, in helping them learn stories. Not just truth, but stories of how that story was embodied in the life of somebody in the Bible. And you know what? And I will tell you as parents, that's one thing that we're trying to do with Parent Cue, is to give you a simple prompt, a cue, something that you can go to that's quick and easy, that you can use to create a story time for your child, for your son or your daughter. And basically, that's what we're trying to do in our middle school and high school ministry, is not just minister to the children and youth while they're here, but give you some tools and things you can carry it forward as parents so that you can enjoy that. And one of the things that they need is that story time. And then, folks, they never outgrow it. Now, the stories need to grow with the kids, you know, so I understand that what you're telling a 4-year-old is not what you're talking to about your 6th grader, but story is still important. You know what other story they need to hear? They need to hear your story. They need to hear our story. They need to hear moms and dads' stories. They need to hear grandmoms and granddad's stories. They need to hear the stories of how you've experienced God in some unmistakable way. They need to hear those stories in church. They need to hear our stories, so that they understand that the Bible is not just a book, or that God is not just a concept, but He's somebody that we can experience in real life. And do you know what stories they most enjoy hearing from you? Yeah, you do. When you messed up. Is it not true? That's the stories that they most love to hear. And it's the story we most don't want to tell them. You know why? Because they say, well, if I tell them the story about when I did that, then they're going to do that. And if they do that, they're going to experience the same. I just don't want to go there. I don't want to open that door. Because if I open that door, well, they're going to go down the same road. Folks, let me tell you, one of the biggest guarantees, I can't offer any guarantees. But one of the biggest things you can do to help them not go down that road is tell them about the time that you did. Now, I'm not saying embarrass them, not saying be inappropriate. I'm not saying that, again, that's how you tell it to a 4-year-old, it's the same you talk to your 6th grader. But they love those stories. And what it tells them is mom, dad, grandma, they're real people. They're real people. And some of the stories that we need to share is the times, well, maybe we didn't quite live up to the mark. And the other times, the stories they need to hear is the times when they've seen that we didn't live up. And the story they need to hear is simply this: hey, son, I blew it. Would you forgive me? Would you forgive me? So children need description. They need stories, not just statements and truth. And they need to hear biblical stories, and they need to hear our stories as well. Second thing I would suggest is that children need demonstration. Demonstration. They need to see the truth of God revealed in the lifestyle and acts. Now, do they see in us that we follow God imperfectly? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And it's good for them to see that our spiritual journey is a jagged one, not a straight upward line. Because then they begin to realize, okay, my journey is probably going to be somewhat similar as well. That this whole adventure with God is not about getting it right all the time. It is about the fact that in the process, I am going to make mistakes. I am going to be imperfect. But at those points in time, I also know what it means to experience God's grace and God's mercy. I not only know how I can walk on water with God, but I also can understand the fact and help my children understand that sometimes I'm going to sink and God can pick me up out of it. They need demonstration. Now, simple question. These things that you have in your vision that you want to pass on to the next generation, be it to the life of the church, be it in your home, be it as a parent or grandparent, are the things you're looking to pass on, is there any credible reference to that where they can see you doing that in your own life? I mean, most of us want our kids to pray and digest the scriptures and learn these things. And I'll tell you, I mean, we do a really, really best job we know how to do around here about supporting you as that. But an hour on Sunday morning probably isn't going to get it done. And so, do they see us praying? Do they see us talking? Do they, when a challenge comes, when we're facing that, almost seemingly insurmountable wall in the road ahead, do we stop? Do they see us stop and talk to God about that? Or is it just merely frustration and overwhelmingness at the thing, and we try to pull the whole self-sufficiency thing? Now, everything I've just told you I've done. I mean, the wrong part of it. And so have you. But the point is, when we ask ourselves that question, is what I'm trying to pass on, is there any place that my child can look at me and say, you know what, that makes sense, because I see you at least trying to do that as well. And then the third thing I would share with you is this. Children need a description. They need to hear the stories. They also need a demonstration. They need to see it. And I know, well, they just need to see it. And then the third thing I would say that children need is our dedication. Now, I could have started here, because in some ways I think this is ground zero when it comes to parenting. By dedication, I'm not suggesting that anybody in this room, especially, is not dedicated to seeing our children and the children of the church grow in faith. I think we're dedicated to that. But the critical question is, how do the kids know that we're dedicated? How do the kids know that we're dedicated? Because here's it. Children need to know that they're important and that they have a place. And the place, first of all, where I think that needs to happen first is in the home. And then I would say it also needs to happen in the church. Where do children get the cue that they are a priority, and they're living in a relationship that whether or not they get it right or don't get it right, that doesn't change? Let me share with you two examples from my life. One that I got really, really wrong, and one that, well, I think I got sort of right. Just to give you a flavor. Because I'm going to suggest to you that children realize how important they are to us to the degree that we're willing to step out of our world and into theirs. Let me tell you one example. This one, not so good. As my oldest child, a son, began to advance into his teenage years, I began to observe that things began to change. And it wasn't just his voice and facial hair and all those things that start happening at those ages. There was a change in attitude. Part of this attitude was displayed in a variety of ways in terms of what he said, how he said it, and how he began to dress and appear. And you're going to think, in this day and age, can you really believe that this pastor even thought this was an issue? Well, yes, he did. His hair began to grow. But it kept growing. And growing. And growing. To the point when I looked at him, I realized his hair began to look like my hair did some time ago. And I'm looking at it and says, well, no one else, I mean, what's going on? The other thing that was going on with the hair growing thing was objects began to appear on his face. Like, they looked like fishing lures. Okay, and they began to appear in different locations that, for all the world, did not look all that comfortable to me. And, so there was a fishing lure here, and one here, and one here, and, I thought, man, I'm just going to hang a sardine on you and go fishing. And I'm looking at this, and I'm realizing nobody else, all the other kids aren't necessarily doing this. Of course, probably they were. I just wasn't. Well, finally, I began to realize this is some sort, in my opinion, I viewed this as some sort of rebellion. And so one day, in the heat of anger, I said, you're going to get your hair cut, and you're going to get all the fishing lures. That's called fishing lures. But you're going to get that metal taken off your face. And I tell you, for a few weeks, I did not have a relationship with my son. Because he thought that hair and fishing lures were more important than he was. I don't know what the issue is, but sometimes we forget what the issue is. It may not be hair, it may not be fishing lures, but sometimes you got to sort it through with your children and say, do they know that I'm dedicated to them? Do I know where I stand in the world? And that their efforts at self-expression have nothing to say about their well-being or my role as a parent. And we worked through that one. But it was not the happiest moment in our relationship. And can you believe that I was so silly, that I was so dumb as a dad to think that stuff was important? The reality is, hair and fishing lures or whatever the issue is, if that's your biggest worry, you don't have a worry. And I didn't either. But I didn't see it. That one didn't go so well. Let me tell you one that I sort of got right. This same son, I began to realize, is on a whole different career path than I ever imagined. I really realized that my wife and I are raising an artist, and I'd never raised a creature like this before. Now, I hadn't raised any creature before, because he's the oldest, so, my son got the brunt of the mistakes. We learned a couple of things at least the second time around. But anyway, so I'm raising an artist I know nothing about this world. I cannot draw a recognizable stick figure. I could draw one. You would not. What's that? I mean, truthfully, I can't. And yet, very talented, very gifted. Actually, I take some credit because he had to sit through countless sermons when he was a kid, and drawing there in the pews on the back of the offering envelope is, I'm sure, where the talent was discovered. So it all works out. So I'm raising an artist, and all of a sudden, I'm getting questions like, Dad, take me to the comic book store. The what? You mean they have stores where they just sell comics? Uh-huh. Take me to the comic book convention. I mean, they have a whole convention around comic books. I mean, I grew up, well, I'm not going to talk about that. We didn't have conventions. And so I began to go to comic stores and comic conventions. And at that point what happened? I stepped into his world. He became the teacher. I became the learner. Now this is one I think that I sort of stumbled into and got right, because I said, you know what? This is a time where I need to discover who he is and not worry so much about who I think he ought to be. And so our voyage of discovery at that point became all about that. And his world looks much more like this, and much more like this, and much more like her. I don't know. There's all these goofy pictures, and and that's exactly who he's become. He's an artist, and he's done a little bit of artwork around the church, and God is blessing his life that way. But I'm thinking, what if I hadn't taken the time when he was 13, 14, 15, just to step into his world and learn what that world was all about, at least at some level? What do children need? They need a description. They need to hear stories. They need to hear Bible stories. They need to hear our stories. They need demonstration. They need to see some semblance of a model. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real. And they need dedication. They need to know that they really, really, really hold a place of ultimate importance in the lives of their families and in the life of the church. So with that in mind, we're going to invite you to do a week later that we had planned to do last week. You know that we have been building onto the building, and the primary thing that we're building are some classroom space for children and adults because we realize how important this is. Now, like any room in this building, just know, every room in this building you can put on the job description of that room multi-use. But at least these rooms are being designed with a particular audience in mind and particularly governed to them, and others may get to borrow them from time to time as well. So we're going to conclude service a little early and invite you to visit these new areas of construction at your leisure. Here's how it's going to work. First of all, when you leave the sanctuary, if you have children in Sunday school, go get them. Okay? Go get them and bring them with you. Okay? Then, once you've, if you don't have children, you don't have to get anybody. You can just skip that part. Okay? Then, you're free to roam both sides of the new construction. And our ushers will have some buckets of Sharpie markers there at the intersection where the buildings are coming together. I invite you to grab a Sharpie or two for you and your family. And as you wander through the construction, just write on the floor. Perhaps a scripture verse, a prayer request, a ministry dream, anything that you feel you'd like to record. Now, with the exception of the youth room, I'm just going to tell you it's all going to get covered up with floor tile. So don't worry about it too much, but it's going to be there. From our perspective, this is our way of taking a bit of ownership of what we expect God to do through these buildings. Without the handprint of God and the commitment of God's people to dream about the ministry that can happen, they're just another building. And I don't think that's what any of us want. And so take a few minutes as you wander in Rome with your children. Let your children write what they'd like to write. You write what you want to write. If you want to write 6, 10 messages across, go ahead. Just don't write on the walls. Just keep it on the concrete. But as you walk, just take time to reflect and dream together and do this as a family and use this as a time when you can dream and think together about where the church fits into this grand process of handing the faith out to the next generation.